It was another stifling day, spent in the field with sweat on my brow. The young woman diligently planted the last seed in the ground and looked up at the scorching sun. In her previous life, she worked hard to get into the faculty of agriculture and biology. Her parents condemned her choice and did not accept her sincere interest. However, in her current life, she remembered those moments fondly. After all, her mother did not know that her daughter would cause an agrarian revolution in another world. Not long ago, her life was filled with luxurious balls and aristocracy. She was always surrounded by people in elegant dresses and suits, oblivious to hard work. In the center of that lavish party, her beloved stared fixedly at her. That day was a shock to her, as he declared his desire to break off the engagement. She didn't believe anything that was happening. A moment ago, she was making coffee in her kitchen, until there was an explosion. As she recalled the last moments of her past life, an unbearable headache overwhelmed her. Her fiancé said mercilessly that she was faking it to look good, but no one would believe her. Liena looked with amazement at the strange man who was mocking her. It seemed she finally realized that he was Prince David himself. The man didn't understand what was wrong with her and said he was tired of her farce. Liena froze when he said he had only accepted the engagement by his father's order. At that moment, she understood that she was inside the novel she read in her previous life. The girl next to her was Kang Sena, the protagonist of Another World, and she, instead, was in the body of Liena, the typical villainess jealous of the charm and the success of the heroine. She was Liena Pond, the one who furiously fought for the attention and love of her fiancé. At that instant, the girl was struck by the calmness with which she remembered both lives. She was greatly indignant to have received the role of the villainess, who would be banished. She tried to calm down, realizing that something here was different from the usual plot. They judged her for her treatment of Sena, even though she hadn't even reprimanded her for her lack of manners. Even though Sena was not David's official fiancé, she managed to solidify her position. That's precisely why she was furious that her fiancé so easily decided to break off the engagement in front of everyone. Today was her 20th birthday, the day he was supposed to propose marriage. However, he chose to humiliate her in public. Lena understood that she couldn't do anything now because of her situation. She returned terrified to her father's mansion, who would crush her over the dishonor. Lena looked at the man with detachment, not understanding why she had to go through this. In the original story, Lena opposed her father and ended up being thrown out onto the street. This was a catastrophe, as everything in this world was terribly expensive. Commoners had to resort to shamans, as they couldn't afford a doctor. Understanding what awaited her, Lena did not know how her destiny would unfold. The young woman decided to change her father's mind and knelt down pleadingly. She begged with all her might for him not to abandon her. She promised to be good now. It seemed very strange to the stern father to hear something like that from his daughter. He gave her a deceptively kind smile and then ordered her to be thrown out of the palace. Liena couldn't even blink before she was outside the palace gates. Feeling the bitterness of defeat, she smiled ironically for having lost in just a couple of hours. That's how the aristocrat Liena was abandoned by everyone to her fate. She furiously slammed the gates, demanding an explanation of how to live without a penny. The young woman burned with resentment, unsure whether to keep shouting in hopes of clemency. She stood there until a maid appeared behind her. It was the young woman's nanny, who, with pain in her eyes, pointed to a carriage. Liena didn't understand what the carriage was for, as she was unaware of her father's plans. Suddenly, she supposed her father had worried about her future housing. However, her hopes were dashed by the nanny's negative response. The woman cried, explaining that she had been ordered to take her as far away as possible. After this, something froze in Liena's heart when the woman suggested taking her to her homeland, since there she would be safe. The former aristocrat agreed, as she had no other option left. She didn't understand what to do now, as they had truly abandoned her to her fate. The young woman was in a state where she no longer had the strength to cry or suffer. The mistress tried to calm her, telling her that her father knew about her innocence. Liena knew that was a lie, as she didn't appear until the last chapter in the novel. She immediately imagined dying in an alley, without a penny in her pocket. That possible ending scared her so much that she protested instantly, with all her might. She thought she could change something, but everything was already written. It was inevitable. She thought perhaps David wouldn't have abandoned her, but he was a detestable guy. It didn't matter how many times they met. He always acted with arrogance and conceit. Apparently, that was the reason he fell in love with Kang Sena, the only one who dared to challenge him. Liana immediately imagined how unbearable it must be to live with such an ass in real life. Before, her character was obsessed with being with him, but now her happiness hung by a thread. Understanding that it would be very difficult to be happy with that man, she decided to change her attitude. Liana took a deep breath and decided that she had simply been set free. As she thought that her real life would now begin, they finally reached their destination. Wiping away her tears, the nanny hugged the young woman tightly and apologized. Liana thanked her for the huge risk she was taking for her, knowing her father's character. Finally, she added that she would definitely repay such kindness. The woman gently moved away from the girl and asked her not to worry. She said confidently that the Duke would come back for her when she became useful again. Liana understood she was right, but still felt pain hearing those cynical words. Suddenly, the idea surfaced in her head whether they had left her there for their own future benefit. She drove away that thought, just as her kind nanny was saying goodbye to her. Not understanding what awaited her, Liana said goodbye to her dearest person. The girl decided to think positively, as she now had a home. However, her positive thoughts turned sad upon seeing the state of the house. Liana, who had lived in luxury before, looked with horror at the devastation surrounding her. Suddenly, she realized that she was now truly a beggar. She couldn't believe she had lived with a silver spoon, and now this. The last straw was that the already weak roof was leaking. She felt helpless, as she understood that everything now depended on her. Liana jumped up and declared that this was the real life. She was not going to starve or wait for someone to save her. Thanks to her attitude, in a few months she managed to adapt to the situation. The villagers couldn't believe that the Duke's own daughter was living there. They thought Liana was dead until they saw a chicken in her yard. That small detail immediately made them think she was still alive. Liana hid, holding her breath. Upon hearing that the chicken looked just like the one they lost, she stayed hidden until the little girl discovered her behind the house. What a tense moment. The little girl sadly commented that the lady looked very pitiful. The mother wanted her daughter to apologize until she saw Liana. Surprise overwhelmed them. They were stunned by the smile with which the dirty girl offered them sweet potatoes. Luckily for her, the climate was very similar to that of her previous life. And so, in a short time, Liana got down to work cultivating plants. That soil and climate were perfect for growing cereals. A blessing. The young woman knew the local plants, which allowed her not to starve. The local people were amazed by such a delicious delicacy. They couldn't even imagine that something so delicious could grow on their land. In the conversation, Liana discovered that apples cost 1 coin for 3. As soon as she learned the real price, her face instantly darkened. Suddenly, an idea popped into her mind on how to monetize her discovery. Time passed relentlessly, and the young woman had been in Poston for 6 years since she arrived. During that time, she managed to forge her name and put her house in order. Despite the success, 2 years ago, she faced the fact that people no longer needed her product. She understood that she urgently needed a new harvest to sell. The young woman firmly decided that her next big business would be the beautiful apples. Many people here were unaware of the fundamentals of agriculture and how to grow perfect fruits. It was precisely for this reason that she managed to create something that amazed everyone. She was surprised when they told her that such a luxury deserved to be presented to the lord of these lands. She was indignant at the speed with which her neighbors fled with her precious apple. Only then did she notice that they were taking it to an imposing woman. Liana saw for the first time the old woman who ruled these lands. She couldn't believe that it was possible to grow such a large apple without magic. Liana proudly introduced herself as the most ingenious farmer. What a surprise it was when the woman recognized her as Duke Pon's daughter. Suddenly, she claimed that she even had reports on her life and work on the farm. Liana smiled upon hearing her confess that she doubted the girl's abilities. She continued to observe the woman's astonishment, and then stated that the apple was worth a gold coin. Liana argued that they were extremely rare, and that it had taken her a great deal of effort to obtain them. As soon as she mentioned that she had grown 20 such apples, the ruler was wide-eyed. Suddenly, she added that for those fruits one could obtain much more than what she had offered. The woman confessed that she doubted Liana could adapt after her life in the palace. However, the girl was intensely cultivating different varieties of delicious fruits. She praised her peaches so much that the old woman swallowed dryly, unable to help herself. Suddenly, she proposed that she become the court gardener. To her disappointment, Liana just shrugged and said she didn't want to work for anyone. The woman tried to reason with her, telling her that her whole family had turned their backs on her. But the girl didn't care. She was completely self-assured and even proposed investing in her business. Liana also mentioned that she wouldn't mind some protection, considering she was alone. Finally, the woman agreed and demanded that everything necessary be provided for her. Thus, the girl sold all her apples and then the peaches at a higher price. Liana bought land, hired workers, and started raising livestock, increasing her sales. One of those work days, she learned about the wedding of Lord David, who had rejected her. However, the girl wasn't interested in his fate, not even if she could become queen. She said with a smile that she loved agriculture too much to think about such things. This year her harvest was a record, so she started selling in another village. She calmly thought about what to plant next, enjoying her success at the same time. Liana was so distracted that she tripped and fell headfirst onto the ground. She painfully rubbed the back of her neck until she saw the culprit of her fall. The girl couldn't believe she had found a real magic hoe. She was delighted to have found such a gem among the common gardening tools. She barely enjoyed her find when it lit up with a brilliant blue light. As soon as the magic object asked if she was its owner now, Liana immediately accepted. Right after those words, the magical tool flew out of her hands. She couldn't believe what she saw when a magical seal appeared on her hand. Before her appeared a beautiful sword, whose name was Louis Garbin Bontoir III. Despite adapting to this world, she was surprised by such pomposity from the tool. Lena was even more surprised when Louis called her his 10th owner. Louis suddenly proclaimed proudly that 10 volumes would not be enough to tell his story. He introduced himself as a sword forged by the god of abundance, which is why many wanted him. Louis said he was extremely demanding and only allowed himself to be wielded by future emperors. His words did not impress Lena, who thought he was simply a braggart. He added that he hid in a modest form because he fell into the hands of pure idiots. At that moment, the girl began to doubt if she had made the right decision. Meanwhile, Louis kept praising her for having been able to see a beautiful flower buried in the mud. Finally, he blessed her as the future ruler, until she declared herself a simple peasant. The sword only replied severely that it didn't particularly matter who she was. Liana tried to tell him to find someone better, but he was already decided on her. In the end, the girl resigned herself and decided to accept him. Determined to consider him just her companion, she took him in her hand and proposed they get along well. Shortly after, she arrived with the boss, who was amazed by the rapid growth of all the plants. Liana considered it a coincidence until she learned that even female dogs gave birth to 8 puppies, and there were always 2 yolks in the eggs. The Lord considered it strange, but Liana calmly called it a good abundance. Despite all her words, the woman couldn't just ignore this. Liana was amazed at how cautious she was. She calmly cut a fruit until the woman noticed her bandaged hand. Liana couldn't admit that the seal of the Sword of Abundance was on her hand. She casually decided to mention that she had found something strange recently. The lady immediately started to worry, thinking she had poisoned herself with metal. Liana rejected her words and told her she had gotten a rare tattoo. The next instant, she showed the seal, leaving everyone in complete shock. To her surprise, the Lord reacted coldly and ordered her hand to be bandaged again. He also added that his head hurt badly and that Liana should leave. This alerted the girl, as the lady was not one to send someone away for a mere discomfort. Upon returning home, Liana affectionately called Louis immediately. For some reason, the sword resented her, as if she had done something wrong. It was angry because she turned to him after having used another sword. The girl calmed him down, saying she couldn't carry weapons in front of the lady. At first, he didn't trust her, but he melted under her flattery. She gently took him in her arms and promised to bring him next time. His embarrassed reaction made her wonder if a sword could have a soul. She understood that it could not only talk, but also take any form. Despite everything, she still preferred the hoe. Afterwards, she decided to share how abundant this month's harvest had been. Louis immediately proclaimed proudly that it was all thanks to his blessing. Liana didn't believe him, thinking he was just flying around the room. Louis protested, annoyed, repeating it was the blessing of the great god. Despite all his arguments, Liana just mocked him. The girl immediately became alert upon hearing that masculine voice. She quickly approached the window, examining the potential threat. It seemed suspicious to her that there were 3 robust men outside her window. Louis was happy, believing he would finally show off his skills and bathe the passage in blood. However, Liana ordered him not to move until she called him. The sword stoked his courage, after which he gripped the hilt tightly. What a surprise it was to see a tall blonde man behind the door. Although he called her a thief cat, she was still fascinated by his beauty. Aliena found it jarring how little his words matched his elegant face. His truly handsome face completely hypnotized her. She decided to break the uncomfortable silence and asked if he was her little cat. Not long before, the ruler had resumed the story of her divorce. She was the one who initiated the divorce from the emperor, who was stunned by her decision. The woman cut off sharply that she would be the first in this case. Suddenly, she declared that she wouldn't mind being the first wife, that she would kill her husband because of the tedious divorce process. Then she thought that after the divorce they would forget about her existence, but that wasn't the case. She became the grandmother of Cayman Marshall, the emperor of the Marshall Empire. She wanted to tell him something, but he asked her to lower her voice. The lady said that their relationship ended the day the divorce was announced in the cathedral, and that he should be simpler with her. Despite the demand, Cayman did not change his attitude and thanked her for the fruits. The lady called it a misunderstanding after her subtle allusion to the stolen object. Cayman remembered that the sword disappeared from the imperial palace right during the divorce. In addition to this, the unusual abundance of the Poston harvest also raised doubts. He didn't understand why she kept proving that these two events had nothing to do with each other. The woman replied that she was innocent, as she left everything in the imperial palace when she divorced. As soon as Cayman asked about the whereabouts of the sword, she replied that it was in someone else's possession. The ex-empress added that one of her vassals had made a contract with the sword. Obviously, Cayman didn't believe it and thought it was a trick. The woman only added that, no matter how much he interrogated her, it was the pure truth. Finally, he concluded that she was a simple farmer named Liena. It was right after this conversation that the emperor headed to the girl's house. Liena instantly analyzed the man's behavior and was surprised by his respectful treatment. She couldn't believe such a handsome man had called her kitty. The girl stepped back and said she was willing to listen to him at the entrance, as he didn't seem like a criminal. The henchman beside him was immediately indignant at her insolence, but she didn't see the problem. Liena put him in his place, telling him not to expect courtesy after such an invasion. He wanted to reply, but the blonde man's raised hand stopped him. Liena didn't understand his true intentions and was suspicious. However, he told her that he was the owner of the sword she held in her hands. She addressed Louis with a question, but he, scared, said that only she was his master. Liena looked at the blonde man again, awaiting his answer. Louis was instantly offended at being called a double agent. It seemed their dialogue attracted a lot of attention from the man. Liena was surprised that he, being her true master, didn't know the sword could talk. As soon as she said she knew the sword's will, the girl called him calm and serene. Finally, the girl declared that he was not the owner and demanded explanations. She coldly declared that she would not open the door again if he was lying. Cayman introduced himself to her as the grandson of Orlia, the Madam Grandmother. He added that the sword was a valuable object, belonging to the head of his family. Cayman said that he also disappeared right after his grandmother's divorce. He wanted to offer good compensation, but Liena wasn't interested in that. Louis, unexpectedly sad, begged her not to hand him over, as he is ready to live by her side until his hair turns white. Finally, only after that, Cayman became convinced that Liena truly is his owner. Louis said his family never cared about him and demanded that she reveal his true name. This question made Cayman think quite a bit. Without waiting for an answer, Liena said she cannot hand over the sword to someone who is not the true owner. Cayman said this sword is extremely valuable, and he is willing to resort to treacherous methods to obtain it. Liena protested, speaking about Louis's will, but Cayman called him just a weapon. The man suddenly declared, seriously, that he does not want to use force against such a fragile girl. Liena declared that her decision would not change even if he were the most powerful in the world. His armor began to crack as he approached. She decided to take the initiative and touched his lips, saying that her little kitty should be quieter. His behavior turned out to be so incredible that Cayman was petrified. Aliena was surprised by his reaction, as it seemed to her that he was going to propose a marriage of convenience. The girl argued this by saying he had mentioned dirty tactics. She added that this would be the only legitimate way to seize that sword. Despite her reasoning, Cayman was still astonished by her thinking. After a brief pause, he suddenly proposed marriage to her. Liena was cautious about his proposal and told him he had to kneel. She marveled at seeing him fulfill her demand instantly. Despite his willingness, the girl was forced to refuse. Immediately after, she slammed the door in his face at full speed. The gesture seemed so rude to them that they couldn't hide their astonishment. They tried to contact Lena, but she remained firm in her decision. Louis shared information about how sour their expressions were. He was happy to hear that the girl said she wouldn't leave the house today. However, he seriously started considering handing the sword over to that handsome man. Meanwhile, Cayman Marshall was lost in the idea of how they tricked him. For some strange reason, he felt like he was bewitched. Leanna's wavy hair and sweet face captivated him without a doubt. Still, he found it hard to believe that such a beautiful girl could act this way. After losing, he returned to the palace, where his grandmother was waiting for him. She was surprised when he suddenly declared that he would have to displace her. She thought he would take Leanna to the empire, but he fell into her traps. He smiled, saying that she demanded marriage as the only legal way to obtain the sword. The lady knew Leanna's audacity, but she couldn't believe she proposed that to the emperor. He clenched his fist, recounting how she slammed the door after the proposal. Despite his anger, he knew he couldn't return empty-handed. His passionate gaze made his grandmother understand that the stakes were rising. Before, her grandson was calculating and cold, but now he was intoxicated by emotions. She affectionately hoped that all this would transform into love. After 2 days of hiding, Lean had a very strange dream. The girl dreamt of something yellow, soft, and sweet, but couldn't identify it. As soon as she woke up, she immediately thought of a pumpkin, which fit perfectly. She got out of bed so abruptly that, oops, she ended up falling to the floor. Suddenly, all her thoughts were invaded by a sweet pumpkin with noodles. The idea of that delicious food instantly awoke her desire to go harvest. Louis didn't quite understand her words and thought she wanted to cut heads. But that wasn't the case. He criticized her clothes, not knowing she was going to the garden and not a bloody battlefield. The girl said the clothes were impeccable, but that she would need his help. She quickly drew a tool on paper and asked him to take that shape. Louis instantly fulfilled his mistress's will and transformed into a useful pruner. He was extremely disgusted that they had tricked him so cunningly. Louis reacted with extreme disgust as plant sap slid over him. Leanna was so absorbed in the harvest that at first she didn't even notice Cayman. He explained that he came here after hearing voices and decided to offer help. It seems he didn't recognize Louis in his new role, as he thought he wasn't nearby. He looked closely at the shears and finally recognized the sword of pride in them. Leanna decided to tease Louis and said she liked serving him like this. She wanted the sword to help her, but Cayman said he was not going to give her up. She immediately asked if he was the typical obsessed man, which clearly surprised him. The girl decided to take advantage of his presence and asked him for help carrying the pumpkins. In the end, he accepted when she proposed inviting him to try a dish. Leanna proudly showed him the food blessed by the god of the mountain. It didn't impress the boy, who immediately thought it was food for commoners. Leanna smiled and declared that in the future she wanted to open a business selling food kits. Finally, Cayman commented that he couldn't stop eating that soup. While he enjoyed the food, Leanna secretly delighted in his beauty. She was pleased by how much he was enjoying her soup. She decided to show him her new infusion, one she hadn't revealed to anyone. Cayman accepted the drink and noticed, with astonishment, ice cubes. The girl declared that she had excavated a special cave for the ice, using a hoe. The boy wanted to offer his help, but she replied that she could do it alone. For some reason, those words awoke respect towards her. Cayman was shocked by her tenacity and persistence, something he hadn't seen in other girls. He smiled sweetly and said that truly, she was unique. Some years ago, an angel descended upon the lands of the Barker Kingdom. Some considered her a demon, while others thought they should show respect to the guest. Many sought to use her, and in the end, she fell in love with the crown prince and got engaged to him. But she had quite a scandalous character. Her name was Kang Sena, the one who skillfully manipulated Prince David. Her life did not end in falling in love, so she clashed with harsh reality. That face once charmed David, but now he only felt irritation. Kang Sena demanded explanations, and that he admit he was avoiding her. The girl didn't like that they hadn't spoken normally for a long time. David felt irritation and replied that she also didn't wish to talk normally. He recalled how recently she got angry because he danced with Lady Altair and didn't give her a mermaid's tear. Kang Sena immediately accused him, reminding him how he wanted to make Lady Altair his concubine. David tried to justify himself, saying that all that was important from the perspective of political connections. Sena was indignant at the ease with which he made new contacts, knowing that she had no one but him. She called him weak for continuing to excuse himself with the importance of politics. Every new word from the girl irritated him even more. He ordered her to be removed from the office, but Sena wouldn't stop protesting. The girl couldn't believe he allowed himself to treat an extraterrestrial princess like that. Before, he swore eternal love to her, and now he was forming a harem of concubines. She was so shocked by the drastic change in her beloved prince, something that wasn't in the novel. Alone, David mocked her demand for a normal conversation. He abandoned Liena because Kang Sena had been recognized as a saint by the cathedral. David thought Duke Pond would beg them to accept Liena as a concubine in the palace, but instead, he threw her out in disgrace. Now he was a threat to David, joining another faction, and furthermore, it hurt him that Liena would never be like Kang Sena. He couldn't believe he was truly starting to miss her. David tried to get something out of her, but there was no trace of her. He doubted it greatly. He didn't believe she could survive among commoners. The man suddenly understood that Kang Sena no longer made sense. He became obsessed with restoring Lian to her princess status. His vanity rejoiced, imagining her happiness at his feet. Meanwhile, Cayman thought exactly the same thing about his new acquaintance. He didn't understand what he could do with those hands that seemed to break when touched. He also couldn't stop thinking about the ice cave she had dug. His aide asked him why he was so lost in thought and silent. Cayman suddenly asked how much ice cost and how it was preserved. That person immediately recalled that ice was supplied by mages from the magic tower, and it was impossible to buy. This only confused Cayman further. He needed someone who, based on their experience, could advise him. As if by magic, Liena appeared in his palace with baskets in her hands. The young woman didn't know Cayman also lived there, which surprised her quite a bit. The young man suddenly thought she was there to find him. However, she surprised him by worrying about his sunburned face. She was immediately happy to have brought something useful with her. Liena quickly took out an aloe leaf and said there was no need to spend money on potions when they had this. As soon as Cayman thought about the mark on his palm, she immediately captured his attention. With a smile, she offered him the aloe, perfect for treating burns. Liena added that her grandmother grew agave, which looked a bit like aloe. Cayman was surprised by how common people survived, which brought a smile to Liena's face. He wanted to know if she had learned that from her parents, but Liena replied that she didn't have them. Seeing the boy's surprise, she hurried to explain herself. The young woman declared that she did have parents, but she was not their biological daughter. Cayman still felt uncomfortable, which showed that she was a good person. She added that they adopted her when she was very young, and then discarded her after an embarrassing engagement breakup. She thought it was fine. After all, she could live freely now. Despite her cheerful declaration, Cayman still felt confused. She stroked him, noticing the delicacy with which he had handled her feelings. Cayman froze instantly, feeling Liena's tender touch. It seemed even she didn't understand what she did until she saw his flushed face. She awkwardly shook the basket and repeated that she wouldn't give Louis to him. Her scandalous behavior even reached the grandmother, who immediately came to the scene. At first, she only noticed Cayman, but then she was surprised to see Liena. She joked with a smile about the lovebirds' flushed faces. The woman greeted him immediately, but Cayman mockingly called her grandmother. His address made her think that Liena was unaware of his imperial rank. She decided to play along and called him grandson. Then she asked how they met. Cayman felt uncomfortable with the flowery way Liena described their encounter. The grandmother proposed dropping formalities and being friends. They were almost the same age. The boy tried to refuse, but Liena supported her. She said it was fate. Cayman felt like they were mocking him and told her to do whatever she wanted. Liena smiled and offered them to try her special watermelon punch. As soon as they saw her creation, they were completely amazed. Liena did not reveal the secrets of her recipe, for which she exploded Louis. Cayman supposed Louis was involved, but she denied it instantly. Determined to change the subject, she skewered a piece of watermelon and poked the fork in his mouth. The emperor wanted to object, but her care confused him. He looked thoughtfully at Liena's smile and said the watermelon was too sweet. Alone, he suddenly realized that watermelon was sweeter than any other. He thought it was a coincidence, but the properties were truly different. Before meeting her, Cayman only thought about how to strengthen his power and not about the common people. He felt ashamed that he wasn't even interested in how what he ate was made. The boy suddenly remembered how not long ago, Liena offered him juice. He was surprised that it was made from leftover grapes. He thought it was tasteless because it was leftovers, but Liena explained that it had the same love and effort. Cayman froze when she made an analogy with a person whose value can decrease due to slander. At first, he only wanted to retrieve the sword, but now he understood why she was his teacher. All these thoughts awoke in him the desire to talk more with Liena. What a surprise it was when the girl appeared right below his balcony. She was saying goodbye to him, shining brightly even from a distance. He wanted to say goodbye too, but something inside him stopped him cold. Meanwhile, Liena was delighted by the delicacies the grandmother gave her. She pleasantly recalled all the praise the woman had dedicated to her dishes. Liena was calmly thinking about her next recipe until Louis addressed her. He was devastated because she had tricked him, promising to return sooner. She told him everything about the day, but Louis became furious upon learning that idiot was also there. He saw him as a direct threat and openly despised him. The sword told Lena about the cruelty of the Marshall family, telling her that they only treat her well because of her usefulness. It seems Lena forgot that surname. Although it sounded strangely familiar, Louis insisted that she not remain without her faithful protector and remember his wickedness. She decided to ask him if he had really decided to stay with her forever. She understood that there was no battlefield in his life, but Louis still decided to remain faithful to her. Liena felt he was hiding something, considering his flight from the imperial palace. The next instant, she was surprised to see Louis suddenly hide. She couldn't believe what she saw. Her nanny was in front of her. After years of separation, she still felt joy seeing the one who raised her and gave her a home. Without hesitation, she took her home and offered her something to drink. The woman was surprised that Liena moved from that ruin to another house. Liena felt mixed emotions, as in all these years they had never visited her. Hospitably, she asked what kind of tea she desired, pointing to several herbs. The young woman remembered her nanny's love for tea and prepared her a chamomile one. Throughout that time, the woman attentively observed every action of the abandoned ex-aristocrat. A few minutes later, Liena offered her an aromatic and exquisite tea. She decided to ask if the Lord had helped her, ignoring the truth. The nanny believed the Lord would take pity on the abandoned lady, all thanks to her. Confirming her suspicions, she took a relieved sip. Her words enraged Liena, who survived only by her own means. The nanny told her not to lie, as she wasn't even capable of earning a living. Liena noticed that now they looked at her openly with contempt, with no reason to be kind. The nanny became indignant when the girl stated the price of the chamomile tea. She couldn't charge a guest. Liena replied maliciously that she was the first one to behave improperly. The young woman reprimanded her for not recognizing her efforts. After this, she turned and told her she should leave if she had nothing else to say. The nanny immediately changed her tone and begged for a minute, but Liena remained firm. However, she froze when she heard the Duke's order to return home. The nanny burst into tears, telling her how hard her departure was for him. She described in detail how much he had suffered. Her words only sparked Liena's anger further, as it was obvious she didn't believe those stories. The nanny froze when she asked if he had found a new use for her. Liena realized there was no affection at all and ordered her to leave immediately. The woman threatened to tell the Duke, but Liena only cursed at him. Just as the nanny was at the door, Liena added a couple of malicious words. The door slammed shut behind her, after which her body felt unpleasant sensations. A new day dawned, and for Cayman, it began with a conversation with his sister. All this time, he did nothing but daydream, not knowing when he would return to reality. Princess Rise told him it was inappropriate for him to stay so long in someone else's lands. After the divorce, his grandmother returned to her homeland, where they gave her territories on the border with the empire. The former emperor missed her and created a teleportation zone. Cayman wanted to tell her he felt ashamed, but she immediately gave him the reasons for his delay. She supposed he was either still obsessed with the sword, or he had fallen head over heels in love for the first time. Cayman said it was absurd, but the blush on his face betrayed him. He couldn't believe that Lena wouldn't leave his mind, even during meetings. A knight entered the office and reported that something strange was happening in Poston, and that someone was watching Lena. Furthermore, a few days ago, a maid connected to the observers had visited her. He added that, according to Lady Aurelian, they might be related to Liena's ex-fiancé. Instantly, Cayman recalled her words about an embarrassing breakup. The emperor couldn't believe they dared to return now that Liena had flourished and found her way. He quickly headed for the exit, completely determined to rescue the girl. However, he understood that this might seem strange coming from a friend. All these emotions made him wonder, why was he so angry? He found a justification. If they kidnap her, the sword will disappear with her. Cayman vividly imagined Liana being forcibly taken from her home. It was even harder to imagine her ex begging her to return, exploiting her loneliness. This second thought was more terrifying than the first, so he ran to her in an instant. He ordered the perimeter to be checked. While he was inspecting the girl, the sudden silence suggested that she might have left with the villain. As soon as he heard a woman scream, he immediately burst into the house. The first thing he saw was that she was holding something and asking for help. He was paralyzed when he saw the girl holding a destroyed ceiling beam. It turned out that the planks in one corner of the ceiling had deteriorated and rotted. Liana added that she had already removed the damaged part and had spare planks. Unintentionally, she wondered if it was worth asking Cayman for help. The man wanted to suggest hiring a carpenter, but she was ready to do it alone. The girl smiled, saying it was unlikely to find a carpenter in that town. Besides, it wouldn't be safe for her to invite him while being alone. Involuntarily, she remembered the nanny's mockery, who didn't know how she alone repaired the thatched roof. It seemed to Lean that the nanny envied her well-being, and before she took pleasure in her difficult situation, Cayman suddenly noticed the hammer in her hand. She smiled while Louis protested that they were using him again. The girl reassured him again, telling him she only used him in extreme cases. Louis pushed her aside and told her the hammer still didn't seem like the best option to him. The girl didn't realize how she ended up practically on the floor after the impact. She didn't understand what kind of heat emanated from where she had fallen. It turned out she had crashed directly into Cayman, who protected her from falling to the ground. He jumped instantly, asking how she was doing. Liana felt so ashamed after so much loneliness that she couldn't say a word. She immediately backed away, assuring him she was perfectly fine. Even though Cayman took the worst of it, he was only concerned about her condition. He gently caressed the back of her neck, asking her to be careful. After confirming she didn't have any bumps, Cayman sighed in relief. The male attention seemed so strange to Liana that she kept looking at him timidly. Cayman already seemed attractive to her, but now she couldn't take her eyes off him. She reprimanded herself for relaxing and forgetting how handsome he was. It seemed strange to Liana to think that she could suddenly see him as a man, not a friend. She realized that, indeed, he was the perfect husband. Cayman reacted and noticed she was acting strangely and had blushed. He started checking her hand. Not knowing he should check her heart, the man noticed with concern that her hand was swollen and painful. Liana just looked away clumsily and said it was nothing serious. As soon as she said it was all thanks to him, she remembered the warmth of his body. She tried to push those thoughts away, but couldn't get them out of her head. Finally, Cayman said he was excellent at bandaging wounds. After a while, he delicately bandaged the girl's hand. Liana didn't understand why her heart was beating so fast over something like that. The boy asked if something had happened, as if forgetting she was on top of him. He saw her smile and felt great relief, confirming she was all right. He decided to leave, leaving Liana thinking about his sudden concern. The girl stopped him and offered him lunch, but he flatly refused, stopped at the door, and told her not to hesitate to ask him for help. Liana was so stunned that she had no choice but to accept. Alone, Louis apologized once more for what had happened. What was her surprise when she kissed him, thanking him wholeheartedly for everything. She suddenly realized that, without him, she would never have been in the arms of that handsome nobleman. Liana decreed that pathetic David couldn't hold a candle to him, and on top of that, he looked like a dried-up squid. Even so, she was worried that Cayman only needed Louis. Her enthusiasm cooled at the thought that it was all for the sword. Despite this, she was still willing to accept his seduction tactic. After all, he was too beautiful to resist his charms. Aware of her difficult situation, the young woman sighed heavily. Now she understood why emperors yielded to beauty. Still, Liana felt bad because he had left hungry. Upon mentioning potatoes, Louis feared she would use him as a roast. Liana calmed him down and boiled potatoes. Then he said Cayman was emperor. She didn't take him seriously and said he was good enough to do it. The girl instantly became alert upon hearing footsteps behind the door. She didn't understand who could come so late and assumed it was Cayman. Thinking he was coming back for food, Liana naively opened the door, not knowing who was there. Meanwhile, Cayman was completely absorbed in his business. He attentively read every document, trying to concentrate to the maximum. However, his head was still a mess after what happened. Apparently, his grandmother noticed his confusion and asked how he was. She said she brought him something to eat and placed a dish down. Cayman looked at the dish in surprise and asked her what it was. He was surprised, saying it was a complete meal, but she suggested he try it. The emperor was shocked by the delicious taste of that delicacy. While enjoying his light snack, Aurelian decided to inquire about the help Liena provided today. She decided to ask him if it was true that commoners always handled all the work. Despite having money, Aurelian called it admirable that Liena did everything by herself. Cayman suddenly worried again about Liena's injured wrist. The grandmother replied that he shouldn't worry, as she had prepared the sandwich and brought it in gratitude for the help. She also noticed that the girl looked somewhat pale. After concluding that Liena rarely rested, Aurelian left the office. Cayman looked at the sandwich with a sweet smile and decided he would visit the girl tomorrow. Suddenly, he felt ashamed when he realized he was just looking for an excuse to see her. His hopes vanished when he saw a mercenary near the window. He turned abruptly, trying to identify the potential threat. What was his surprise to find Louis in front of him? He asked him if he had decided to be his, but he immediately refused. Cayman felt that the sword wanted to convey something urgent, but couldn't. Finally, he concluded that something must have happened to Liena. Meanwhile, the young woman lay in bed, suffering from a high fever. She used to be healthy, but a single encounter affected her so much. She knew this was going to happen, but the stress was inevitable. That same night she opened the door, expecting Cayman, but she was mistaken. At the door was her father, haughty and cruel. Despite the disgust, she let him in. He immediately began to complain about how withered he felt from worry for his daughter. Liena didn't understand anything. This didn't happen in the novel. In the original story, Kang Sena got engaged 2 years after appearing in this world. And that was the end of it. However, everything was strange from the beginning now. Liena didn't understand why everything was accelerating so much. After the climax, the original Liena was supposed to die, unable to bear the difficulties. Now, the man for whom nothing mattered stood in front of her. Trying to understand the reason for the visit, she reminded her father that she had 5 other daughters. The man said he understood her feelings, but feared that helping her would provoke royal anger. With a terrifying face, he said that the crown prince took pity and was now secretly looking for her. Liena didn't believe those stories, knowing that David only needed the support of the Pond family. She understood that he could face resistance from the nobility for exiling the perfect daughter-in-law. She was disgusted by the mere idea that they wanted to use her for their own petty purposes. Liena abruptly pulled her hand back and coldly replied that it was none of his business. Duke Pond tried to leverage her desire to become crown princess, but all that was foreign to her. The young woman only replied that she was no longer the daughter of the Pond family, but simply Liena. She got up and told him to think about his other daughters, who could become princesses. The man was surprised by the refusal and asked if she thought a word broke blood ties. Liena smiled and recalled how he had banished his own son. The Duke was shocked by her audacity and stood up, but that favored her. With a mocking smile, she opened the door and bid farewell to her father. To conclude, she told him he was just a duke, not a father, and settled the matter. After seeing him out, she felt this was not over yet. Involuntarily, she wondered what they would plot next, and if David would visit her personally. Liena imagined David cuddling Zaina and now trying to look for her. She felt that soon her father would devise something else to hand her over to David. The young woman did not wish to allow the prince's interference in her life due to his inaction. She was constantly thinking of options on how to avoid her destiny. Louis noticed her preoccupation, but she immediately remembered the potatoes. The sword felt her sadness and offered to talk, but she didn't want to talk about it. Despite her bright smile, tears slipped down her cheeks anyway. Liena thought she was fine, but the pain continued to torment her heart. Seeing the girl's tears, Louis regretted for the first time not being able to be human. Liena tenderly hugged her little friend and told him everything would be fine soon. Even thinking about it before sleeping, the girl still couldn't hold back tears. In an instant, a worried Cayman appeared before her. As soon as she showed signs of consciousness, he ran out to find a glass of water and medicine. The girl, as best she could, oriented him, saying the medicine might be in the bag. Cayman was surprised to hear her ask not to confuse her bag, as she needed to leave soon. In a feverish delirium, she added that she needed to hurry. That impacted the boy, as he believed Poston had become her home. The girl said Poston was a good and welcoming place, and that she loved Grandma Aurelian. But despite everything, she still didn't have a place she could call home. Cayman didn't answer her words and proceeded to take care of her. He supposed her escape might be related to her ex-fiancé, who had looked for her last time. The boy felt there could only be one reason for such an escape. Most likely, David realized her true value and tried to win her back. His heart skipped a beat again when tears welled up in her eyes. He trembled sadly seeing her cry even in her dreams. Cayman couldn't understand what kind of boy made the always radiant Liana cry. Following an impulse, he kissed her fingers and promised to become her shield. The next morning, she woke up feeling more relieved. Louis snuggled up to her, worried, and told her he had never seen such a weak master. The girl wasn't offended by Louis and replied that she needed to hurry. What was her surprise to find the handsome Cayman in an apron? He thought she felt uncomfortable because of his arrival, but she was already thanking all the gods for his beauty. She got up and wanted to tell him she was very busy today. Cayman, smiling, took off his apron and proposed breakfast. He carefully prepared a breakfast of eggs and sausages for her. The girl, perplexed, started eating. Astonished that he was doing it for her, Cayman asked her where she was going and what her bag contained. Liana replied that she wasn't trying to leave Poston forever. She was surprised by Cayman's question about where she planned to go. Suddenly, with complete seriousness, he declared he would go there with her. She didn't understand the reason for such a decision. With him having so many affairs in Poston, the man explained that with her would be the sword of ego, his main objective. Suddenly, he waved his hand and said that wasn't the main reason. Cayman gently squeezed her injured hand and confessed that he was worried about her. She blushed when he said he didn't want her to suffer alone. Cayman said he needed someone who could wake her up from her nightmares and be a firm support. He continued to hold her hand firmly, promising to stand by her side. Lean liked this attention very much, but was forced to refuse it. Cayman added that these were not empty words, and that if she still doubted, they could go to her house. Lean smiled ironically, asking if he was perhaps proposing marriage to her again. She couldn't imagine that the next instant he would kneel before her. He held out his hand to her and asked if she was ready to become his wife. The girl was stunned and didn't understand how she had reached this situation. Louis suddenly said that this man was sincere, and yesterday he ran to her when he learned she was unwell. Even so, Liana thought this marriage could put Cayman in danger. Considering that she hadn't told him about her origin, the right thing to do was refuse him. The man's beauty and sincerity captivated her, destroying her initial resolution. For long minutes, he kept looking into her eyes, making her heart beat faster. It seemed unfair to Liana to have to reject someone who cared so much about her. She couldn't refuse and wanted him to make the decision himself. The girl stood up abruptly and revealed that she was Duke Pon's daughter. She thought that would change his opinion, given her father's status, but Cayman didn't even flinch. The young woman added that she was simply trying to avoid her father by running away for a while. Suddenly, she suggested that perhaps it wasn't necessary for her to go so far. Liana thanked him for the idea and decided she simply needed to hide somewhere. She wanted to go out onto the street, but a masculine hand stopped her. Cayman tenderly approached her and reminded her that she hadn't yet answered his confession. Liana was shocked, but still decided to buy herself some time. He promised he would stand by her side, but she wasn't sure he could face the Duke. Cayman ordered her not to worry and to simply focus on him to answer. The next instant, he did something that couldn't leave her indifferent. He touched her face and proposed dating with the prospect of marriage. Meanwhile, Cayman's sister was in his office. She looked surprised at the sphere when the emperor decided to contact her. The girl reprimanded him for the sudden call and told him to mind his own business. Again, she was surprised by how deep and silent his sigh was. It was strange, because before posting, he was a real workaholic. Reese decided she would only listen to him and force him to work. However, she was shocked when he told her he had met a woman he wanted to marry. The girl was so surprised, she couldn't find the words. As soon as she realized what he had said, she shouted throughout the imperial palace. She asked if he was really talking about a real woman and not a cat. Calming down, she said she would look for information about Lena Pond's broken engagement. Cayman threateningly added that he wanted to erase the Pond family from this world or annex, posting to his lands. Reese's head buzzed from such absurd desires. The next instant, she remembered the real reason for his stay and posting. She reminded him that his main objective should be the sword of self-love. Cayman only replied calmly that there was no need to worry about that. Riz exhaled and asked if she had accepted the marriage. She thought Liana had immediately agreed to marry the emperor, but Cayman omitted a lot. Anticipating his sister's surprise, He told her he hadn't revealed his imperial rank yet. Meanwhile, Liana still couldn't recover from the recent events. Her head wouldn't stop thinking about how passionately Cayman had pressed her against the wall. She didn't know what to do, as it was evident how much he liked her. Cayman caressed her face, insisting on knowing why she hesitated like that. Liana couldn't hide her astonishment upon hearing him relate it to her ex-fiancé. She immediately asked how he dared even insinuate such a thing. The young woman didn't know what to do, as she knew very little about Cayman. Nevertheless, she managed to gather the courage to confess her feelings to him. She couldn't believe they were officially a couple and had confessed. The next day, she went to her grandmother's residence, where they talked about a new plant. The woman told her about its effects, but Liana was unable to concentrate. It seems her interlocutor finally noticed the girl's confusion. She shouted at Liana, who jumped in fright. Aurelian expressed her concern, as Liana's eyes used to shine when talking about the farm. However, Liana couldn't admit that her eyes were now shining because of her ardent grandson. Suddenly, she stated directly that her father had recently visited. Liana didn't know the exact reason, but suspected the prince needed her. The woman immediately became indignant that he dared to come to her lands in secret. Liana added that at first she thought about leaving Poston. She, with difficulty, let slip that her guy had proposed that she stay. It seems that, without thinking, she revealed her relationship with Cayman. At first, the woman didn't suspect that the boy was her grandson and started asking questions. Liana was embarrassed to answer, but Cayman, who entered the room, did it for her. Lady Aurelian looked at both of them in surprise, unable to believe what had happened. She immediately proposed a wedding next week and continuing with 3 children. The woman moderated her enthusiasm upon learning that their relationship had started yesterday. The young people couldn't explain what sparked their mutual feelings. Aurelian's heart rejoiced upon seeing that tender touch of hands. She decided to ask Liana about her plans, but she only replied that she was thinking of hiding in an icy cave. The woman could not allow it and offered her castle. She explained that her father could never enter there, no matter how evil he was. Liana did not want to bother Aurelian, but she was delighted. She smiled sweetly and was glad to have found such wonderful people in Poston. The woman smiled and told her she was glad to be a good person for her. Finally, Cayman ordered that Liana be assigned a room next to his. Everyone was stunned by such a decision, but he justified it with security matters. Liana understood that this might not be the only reason, and her heart beat stronger. She hinted to the boy that he was behaving too compromisingly. Liana got up behind the butler and promised she would return soon. As soon as she left the room, Aurelian lunged at the emperor. She didn't like that he was still keeping Liana in the dark. It seems Cayman didn't understand the real reason for her anger and thought it was because of Liana's origin. She reminded him that Liana still doesn't know he is the emperor. It distressed Cayman that she said the girl might be offended if she knew the truth. He explained that he didn't intend to hide it, but he was too scared to tell her. The boy sincerely feared that she would choose the farm and leave him. He said it with such anxiety that his grandmother couldn't believe his motive. She froze when he asked her if she thought she would choose the farm instead of him. The woman thought that, even if Liana was happy in Poston, he must tell the truth. From her experience, she already knew that relationships built on lies are just an illusion. Once her husband said he wasn't going to live just for her and broke her heart with his troubles. He called it audacity that she behaved like that, possessing the empress's crown. She added, worried, that she truly considered him her dear grandson and alienated a friend. For that very reason, she longed for them to live happily and without the pain she suffered. Aurelian was recognized for her mastery of the sword, but also for her sad marriage. Therefore, Cayman could not allow Liana to give up her dreams for him. He found certainty that, by protecting Liana and her farm, they would be happy. He spent the rest of the day reflecting on his grandmother's words. He suddenly understood that the only viable option was to integrate Posting into the imperial territories. For the first time, he felt the fear of not being accepted by someone. As soon as he heard Liana's cheerful voice behind the door, all his worries vanished. The girl was happy that, thanks to Cayman, everything had been resolved. She almost shrieked with joy about how great her boyfriend was. Still, she didn't understand who he was, given his calmness about her father. She assumed his status was very high, but she had never seen him in the duchy. The girl greeted the young man with a smile when he asked if she was comfortable. Relieved that she was comfortable, Cayman proposed they go for a walk together. Liana found it hard to hide her nervousness about being alone with him now. She couldn't stop discreetly glancing at the man. It seemed that the girl's audacity had vanished, judging by her look. She didn't understand why she felt so strange. If it wasn't the first time they walked together, the young woman was experiencing the magic of a date for the first time. Her heart raced. Before, every encounter with David only brought her suffering, never pleasure. He would always leave her, inventing work, when in reality he was fleeing with Sana. Liana couldn't oppose his decisions and only felt her heart grow heavier. All this time, they were ordered to keep quiet and accept every decision David made. Therefore, every initiative by Cayman was met with a special tremor. She had never imagined someone would treat her the way he did. She didn't dare dream that they would delicately take her hand, instead of pointing at her. The pain was so intense that tears involuntarily welled up in her eyes. She quickly wiped away her tears, surprised to have been able to love someone, feeling Cayman deeply in her heart. She smiled radiantly and said she liked holding hands. Those words sounded so sincere that the man couldn't hide his turmoil. He lowered his gaze and begged her to wait a little longer, as he didn't want to disappoint her. The girl squeezed his hand tightly and told him she would wait, and that she believed in him. Thus they walked together until night fell, which Liana received in her room. She smiled, noticing that she had already forgotten what it was like to sleep in such rooms. Liana confessed that she had an unsettling feeling, as if she had forgotten something. Finally, the one she promised to return to appeared behind her. A promise she broke. Liana placed the sword by her side and said they would stay there for a while. Without telling him the details, the girl fell deeply asleep. The next morning, she was surprised to see a blonde young woman in front of her. At first, she didn't understand what was happening and thought it was all a dream. Checking that she was still asleep, she turned to the other side. What was her surprise when the girl reprimanded her for being able to close her eyes? The stranger pointed accusingly at her and deducted 20 points from her score. Stunned, Liana immediately asked her who she was. She merely majestically introduced herself as Susan. Liana introduced herself in the same way and shook her hand, after which an awkward silence arose. She internally regretted not having Louis by her side at that moment. The girl warned just in case that this was her room, but Susan already knew. She surprised Liana by telling her she had come to greet her. She still didn't understand what was happening, but this brought a smile to the girl's face. Finally, they went for a walk, where Susan followed the girl very closely. Liana decided to go out to relieve the tension, but she followed her. Susan asked her where she was going, but Liana only replied that she wanted to stroll. She calmly declared that the fact she liked to move was an advantage. Noticing that everyone greeted her on the way, Liana concluded she posed no danger. As soon as she mentioned that she liked Poston, Susan asserted that the Empire was better. She suddenly asked what Liana thought about the Emperor. Liana supposed that the rumors about her harvest might have reached the Empire. Not knowing Susan's true motive, she thought it was a great opportunity for expansion. On the way, she casually noticed some raspberries growing. Liana said that, thanks to the fresh air, she didn't need to bathe and suggested trying them. Susan called the raspberries sour, but the girl replied that jam could be made. It was a surprise to her that Liana was capable of making jam by herself. Noticing her resemblance to Cayman, she suggested helping her gather raspberries. Meanwhile, Louis intently watched Cayman's arduous training. Before, he thought he was just the grandson of a foolish emperor, but his skills were admirable. The sword felt a strong ego emanating from him, reflected in his confident gaze. This boy reminded him of his first master. Once that master met the sword, proclaiming himself the strongest. Louis was fascinated by his eagerness to defeat the dragon and accepted him as his new master. This young man would later become the great hero and emperor of a vast empire. Louis Marshal. As his status grew, the sword increasingly became a mere display piece. Louis endured it, but that patience ran out with the previous one. Stupid emperor. He couldn't believe he would meet this descendant in distant Postin after his departure. Louis was amazed when Cayman recognized him, as he was hidden behind a tree. He immediately began to justify himself, saying he wasn't spying on him, but verifying his actions. Cayman didn't listen to his words and stated he was serious regarding Liana. Louis couldn't hold back tears when he added that he respected his will to serve Liana. Cayman asked if he wanted to be shaken a little, and then, confidently, took Louis in his hand. Louis decided to test him to see if he was suitable as a companion for Liana. At first, Louis resisted, but he was impressed by Cayman's confident movements. He was fascinated by this boy's astonishing abilities. Contradictory feelings invaded him until he heard his master's voice. Leanna discovered with surprise that Louis was next to her boy. The sword immediately lunged at her, crying, saying it was a bad sword, accidentally knocking over a whole package of raspberries, which flew towards Susan. Leanna sat tiredly on the floor, rubbing the spot where she was hit. Susan asked her how she felt and showed her the raspberries she had saved. Cayman was perplexed to see these two girls together. Susan was the second princess of the Martial Empire, and moreover, Cayman's sister. After a while, they were in the kitchen and Leanna started preparing raspberry tea. Leanna couldn't stop worrying that Susan might cut herself. After taking care of the raspberries, she explained step by step how to prepare the tea. 10 minutes later, they were ready to present their iced raspberry tea. Leanna almost dropped the tray upon seeing the boy overheated after training. She tried to hide her embarrassment and ordered him to dry his hair. Susan watched attentively how they interacted. As soon as they were all together, the girl offered them freshly made tea with a smile. To the sisters' surprise, the atmosphere between her grandmother and her brother was different from usual. Susan didn't understand why they got along so well, given Cayman's status. Suddenly, she thought that Leanna might not know that Cayman is the emperor. Her assumption was confirmed by the tense glances of Cayman and the lady. She wanted to reprimand them, but her brother changed the subject just in time. With astonishing speed, she dragged her into a room to speak privately. Lady Aurelian explained that Cayman has two twin sisters, and one decided to visit him. That sentence made her think that he was trying to hide the existence of his sister-in-law. Due to all these events, she noticed with horror that she felt like the daughter-in-law. A few days ago, Susan was arguing with Reese about her brother's return to the Empire. She couldn't believe that cat lover was capable of falling in love. The girl suddenly remembered the sword of selfishness and supposed it was looking for her. She left, saying in the end that she had to personally bring her brother and the potential daughter-in-law. Susan said it was unfair that her brother was resting alone. Alone, she asked him directly what he really did for a living. Cayman immediately replied that he doubted she cared about him. She asked why he hadn't told Lena about his title and left everything as it was. As soon as she suggested he was planning the marriage for the sword, he replied that he couldn't do such a thing. Initially, he thought that revealing his identity would put him at a disadvantage and attract blackmail. But the more they talked, the more he realized he had to keep everything secret. Cayman crossed his arms and declared that he wanted to protect Leanna and Louis's desire to follow her. To Susan, this meant he only feared the woman's hatred. She was irritated by how casual he was with the sword, the symbol of the emperor's legitimacy. Cayman explained that, thanks to the marriage, he and Leanna could jointly possess the sword. Leaving that topic for later, she asked about the time frame for his stay in Poston. The emperor expressed his desire to include Poston in the empire, to freely take care of his affairs. The sister found it so incredible that she was speechless. However, he considered it right and totally feasible. She didn't believe him when he said that Poston was really a good place. He added that until the plan was fulfilled, his identity must be secret, but she pulled her hand away. Susan couldn't believe he was willing to do that for a woman. It seems that Louis shared her feelings regarding the future engagement. Neither of them could believe they might soon have to take care of children. Therefore, they continued to follow Leanna with growing concern. Strolling through the garden, the girl accidentally discovered a neglected greenhouse. One day, she suggested having a picnic there, but the grandmother's face darkened. Approaching a bush, she asked Louis to transform into scissors. Susan was about to say that this was the gardener's job, but Leanna was already pruning roses. She didn't like that the girl kept doing things that weren't her responsibility. She couldn't believe Leanna still didn't suspect she would become empress. Susan almost revealed everything, while trying to demonstrate that she shouldn't do those things. Leanna couldn't stand it anymore and called her words meaningless nonsense. She added that it is natural for a person to work to live well. Leanna believed that the master should work even harder than the other laborers. She reminded Kamna. She suddenly said she now understood why they had fallen in love. Susan embarrassed Lena with a sudden question about whether she loved her brother. She declared that her brother had suffered a lot since childhood because of their grandfather's prejudices. She didn't like her and Riz, which is why she often scolded them, and then Kamna for trying to defend them. Cayman always took care of his sisters and supported them unconditionally. He always strove to support them in everything they excelled at. Susan became distressed and apologized, saying she had become very sensitive. Leanna supported her and said Cayman must be happy to have such good sisters. When she was thrown out of the house, Not even her beloved sisters helped her. She thought she would always be alone. That's why Cayman's protection surprised her so much. Liana smiled and said meeting Cayman had been a blessing. Susan returned her smile and asked her to take care of her brother. She suddenly said that they were family now, and Liana's heart filled with warmth. The girls squeezed her hand and begged her to take care of her too. They immediately tensed upon hearing shouts reaching them. Susan tried to find out the reason, but they were asked to stay in the greenhouse for a while. Liana still didn't know that the unwanted guest would be her own father. Lady Aurelian was shocked by his audacity and his attempt to use force. The invasion of kingdom soldiers was a declaration of war, and Cayman wanted to intervene. Aurelian said she couldn't allow it, as she was now driven by emotions. Cayman accepted her point of view and asked her to be careful. Duke Pond, who abandoned his daughter as useless, only provoked disgust in him. He knew that, even if Liana forgave him, he could never do the same. Grandmother Aurelian decided to resolve it peacefully and invited the Duke into the building. Duke Pond thought that she was now just the lord of Semposton, not the empress. The woman noticed his attitude, but still decided to get to the truth. He said he had come to express his respect for the care of his daughter. The woman declared that it wasn't her merit, as Liana had achieved everything alone. Finally, she added that the girl had renounced the Pond surname. The Duke, furious, replied that he had come to take his daughter away. Aurelian said she had given him permission, as Liana had wanted to travel some time ago. The man hesitated and said that Liana could hardly go so far. The lady glared at him furiously, demanding an explanation. He replied that David misses his daughter, as the one everyone called a saint revealed her true essence. Aurelian explained that Liana might not want the status of crown princess, but he thought otherwise. Duke Pond decided to remind her of her divorce and her miserable life. Aurelian could no longer live with children and grandchildren, and also had to endure looks of contempt. The lady calmed down and said it's good to wish the best for one's children. Suddenly, she added that Liana looks much happier now. The lady said that living as one wants does not always guarantee a happy ending. Despite that, this path can be free of regrets. She stood up and demanded that he leave Liana alone, as a father should. However, the Duke believed that Liana should dedicate her life to the family. Meanwhile, the girl was feverishly analyzing the situation. She was worried that, without her intervention, her father would attack Poston. Even more distressing was that Grandma Aurelian and Cayman could suffer. Louis tried to cheer her up and said he would protect his mistress. Liana laughed at him and reminded him how much he used to cry. Even so, she thanked him for the support, feeling much better afterward. As soon as she finished speaking, an unknown knight seized her. It turns out the Duke knew from the beginning that she would hide in the Count's castle. Susan tried to protect her sister-in-law immediately, threatening him with a tribunal. The man only provoked her further, saying that a lord of a small village would do nothing. Liana intervened and called it an invasion, but he instantly twisted her words. He fanatically said they were doing it for her own good. Liana condemned him for those words, as they only sought the good of the lineage. He just said that she, raised in wealth, should generously pay for that favor. She tried to say that she had already paid everything with her dishonor, but the knight interrupted her. He said that if she truly cared about the family, she could have done something about it. Liana understood that a mere employee would hardly know something like that. The next instant, he called her useless, incapable of seducing a man. As soon as he spoke those words, a shining sword, Louis's sword, appeared in her hand. He said that, after countless centuries lived, Liana was the best owner. Louis begged her to take him in her hands, and thus they could fight together. Liana was astonished by the support of that grumpy but honest sword. She followed his words and understood that she must not back down. Hearing those words and doing nothing was not like her, so she aimed the sword at the man instantly. Her strikes were so precise that he even questioned his talent. She continued to reject the attacker with mastery. Apparently, not even Liana understood what was happening, as she had never wielded a sword. Suddenly, for the first time, she understood the full power of Louis. She smiled cheerfully, and Louis said he would not leave those who torment his mistress in peace. After those words, the girl launched an attack menacingly. She concentrated, preparing to deliver the decisive blow. Liana struck the villain's sword with unthinkable force, completely shattering it. It offended the knight so much that he fled from her crying. Liana kissed Louis immediately, telling him how amazing he was. She sincerely thanked him for defending her. Despite his previous taunts, Louis only said he prefers a master who recognizes his merits. Like her, he also added that he wouldn't want to be used, like scissors. Leanna saw Susan's surprise and said it was a long story. It seems the girl was so impressed with what she saw that she was speechless. Finally, her face lit up with enthusiasm, and she asked him to repeat that move. She was in shock over how great her future sister-in-law was. Leanna tried to explain that it was all Louis's power, but there was no stopping her. Susan begged her to teach her how to wield the sword that way. She was so absorbed at that moment that she didn't immediately notice the grandmother and Cayman. Cayman found out about the soldiers who broke into the palace and came to see how they were doing. Leanna proudly held up Louis, saying that he was able to protect them. Cayman was surprised that Louis could fight by himself and control the master's body. Suddenly, he thought that all the feats of the ancient emperors were achieved with the power of the ego sword. He was also surprised that his grandmother was distant. Leanna, likewise, noticed her grandmother's lost gaze and asked her where she was looking. She only commented with disgust that the agave leaf had been cut. This plant was valuable to them, as it was used in many areas. It turned out that this plant was the only thing Aurelian took with her after the divorce. Suddenly, she remembered the threats from Duke Pond, who threatened her with retaliation. The woman shouted and ordered the butler to bring her armor and her sword. The agave plant transported her back to the emperor's years of love. When he presented it to her, he called it a precious herb, on the verge of extinction due to the war. That night, the young woman proposed cultivating agave on her own. He received her idea with a smile and supported it. He was the fourth prince, far from the throne, but his contribution in the Battle of Heirs helped him gain power. Aurelian knew he still had a long way to go, but she always loved him and wanted to be with him. In response, she only received reproaches for being such a rough and cruel woman. She realized that her vow to be together forever was no longer valid. She couldn't believe that the one who betrayed her trust dared to accuse her. Aurelian said she was returning home and renouncing such an insignificant man. He tried to stop her, reminding her of her status as empress. However, she remained completely inflexible. The emperor begged, saying he couldn't live without her. But she didn't return anymore. Sitting in the carriage, she realized that only he had changed, not her. She was proud of herself, taking one last memory of that pure love. Recovering from her memories, she said Leanna must leave. She ordered everyone to leave and stated that, after the destruction of the agave, it was now her problem. Leanna tried to object, but Cayman knew his grandmother's fiery temper. He calmed her down, saying that Aurelian in anger was devilishly strong and dangerous. She broke a sword with her own hands in her youth. She was a walking, natural disaster. Susan tried to find out why Pond had come looking for Leanna. Sensing the danger, she asked her brother to lend her his sword, ready to send many to hell. She said that both her father and fiancé must be punished. Leanna said she felt nothing for her fiancé and that he looked like a squid. The young woman added that it was fine, but that he was causing too many problems for Poston. She understood that she had to solve this matter alone, as everything happening was a consequence of her actions. Meanwhile, Susan was happy that there were no problems in their mutual love. Leanna was surprised that, on the verge of war, they were talking about love. The young woman said she didn't want to go back and wanted to be with Cayman. Her words sounded so sincere that Cayman smiled. He asked her to trust and wait, as he had something in mind. Alone, Leanna asked him if he didn't want to fight personally. She was worried that the crown prince might defend the duke. Cayman hugged her and told her not to worry about that. He looked her straight in the eyes and thanked her for her words about wanting to be with him. Cayman moved closer to the girl and told her that, even if she said otherwise, they would stay together. After that, he suggested they retire to their rooms. Leanna was so shocked by the recent events that she didn't know where to begin. Meanwhile, Crown Prince David was in sadness. King Sena went to talk to him, but her expectations were not met. David, drunk again, fell asleep after another of their fights. She felt completely taken in by his charm. She was still furious with him, until she noticed a photo on the table. Kang Sayana froze while holding the portrait of Leanna in her hands. At first, she didn't understand who this familiar girl was. Finally, she remembered that she was the villain of the novel, Duke Pond's daughter. Thanks to knowledge of the novel, she broke off the engagement and defeated her sooner. However, she didn't like that David still missed her. She didn't understand why, since Lena Pond hadn't even reappeared. Suddenly, she supposed that David might miss her, even if she wasn't in the novel. At that moment, she understood that her victory hadn't been as easy as she thought. Sena tried to convince herself that it was impossible, that it couldn't be true. However, the Crown Prince's expression said the complete opposite. She couldn't believe her eyes upon seeing the order on his desk to announce that the prophecy had been misinterpreted. This contradicted the main plot and represented imminent danger for Kang Sena. Terrified, she clutched the paper, realizing their relationship hung by a thread. Her suspicions were confirmed by Duke Pon's letters regarding Liana's whereabouts. She couldn't believe that this villain was capable of altering even the original story. Sena decided she must confront that vixen before David did. That very night, Liana woke up startled by shouts of fire. Cayman ran into the girl's room, scared, saying there was a disaster. The sleepy girl couldn't believe her ears upon hearing that the farm was on fire. As soon as she saw the flames, she ran towards her farm without a second thought. She was met by a furious firestorm, not knowing if her calves and chicks had been saved. Liana wanted to throw herself directly into the flames, but they stopped her just in time. She couldn't allow the farm she had cared for so many years to be reduced to ashes. Cayman begged her to calm down, warning her that other people could get hurt. She nodded and proposed extinguishing the fire before it spread to the village. She ordered water to be brought from the nearest well, and as much as they could get. The villagers got to work putting out the fire on the farm. Even Cayman, with unprecedented effort, carried buckets and put out the fire. After a while, everyone breathed a sigh of relief upon seeing the fire subside. Fortunately, the grape harvest was saved, but the watermelon plantations burned completely. Cayman hugged her sadly and told her it was normal to cry if the soul was afflicted. The girl clung to him, feeling she couldn't shed a single tear. Suddenly, she heard witnesses talking about a man in strange clothes who doused the orchard with oil. Everyone understood that it was an arson. Liana froze and supposed her father might have done it. Cayman understood that it was true and looked at the girl with pain in his eyes. Liana declared she couldn't stand it anymore and was going to get an apology from her father. She thought he would try to stop her, but he didn't even consider it. He promised he would catch the criminal and force him to apologize on his knees before her. That same night, she contacted Reese and ordered him to send the engagement notice to the kingdom. He also ordered notification of the annexation of Poston and then sending the border troops here. Reese was surprised, assuming he wanted to demoralize the enemy by provoking Count Russell. Instantly, he started calculating an infinity of possibilities. Reese understood that they would have to take control of the adjacent territories. The girl decided there must be a strong reason for this. He looked at her with an intense gaze and said he had seen something too horrible. Apparently, this frightened Reese, leading her to get to work immediately. He also ordered that detachments of knights be prepared outside. Anchor warned him that entering the kingdom without permission would get him in trouble. But he was ready because Duke Pond had crossed the line. Cayman did not want to see that sad expression on Liana's face again. Not even as emperor would he allow her work to be treated lightly. At that instant, Louis appeared behind him, offering him his power for Liana. Louis justified himself, saying he was not betraying the girl, only making a temporary alliance. Cayman didn't understand the sword's words, but he knew it was asking him to take it. As soon as he took it in his hand, it instantly conformed to the size of his palm. Anchor immediately assumed that the ego sword had recognized him. Even so, Cayman understood that he had only borrowed the power for Liana. Behind him echoed the voice of Duke Pond, urgently calling for Liana. He thanked the sword that he didn't have to go looking for her himself. The man continued to threaten Liana, demanding she come out to meet him. Cayman came out and told him that, after his act, Liana went to defend her lands. He astonished the Duke with the immense number of soldiers in the village. Unexpectedly, Cayman threatened him that harming the ex-empress would be condemned. He let out the war cry and ordered that anyone who resisted be killed. Duke Pond realized that these knights were undoubtedly from the Empire. Seeing that he wouldn't resist, he tried to flee the combat at all costs. As soon as he took a step, Susan's foot slammed him against the ground. The Duke didn't know this girl and thought she was a simple servant. Susan introduced herself as a princess of the Empire, and everything clicked for the Duke. Cayman placed a sword at his head and told him he despised him. He smiled victoriously and said it was an honor to meet his father-in-law. Meanwhile, Liana assessed the damage caused to the field. She touched the surface and accidentally noticed oil on it. Suddenly, she understood that they wanted to burn the house down and she would die. She couldn't believe her own father had gone this far. Liana became alert upon hearing her father's voice outside. She thought he had brought soldiers again, but she saw him on his knees. Cayman stood over him, declaring that he had kept his promise. The Duke began to beg for forgiveness and said he did everything for her own good. Liana was furious, because he burned everything she loved and dared to say that. She said that even if she hit him, it wouldn't bring back her field. The girl apologized to Cayman, thinking his apologies would ease her heart. She smiled sadly and realized that wasn't what she wanted. Cayman held her hands and said he would do anything to cheer her up. Duke Pond trembled, unable to believe that Lyanna had such a relationship with the Emperor. Lyanna didn't know what to answer, as he was still her father. Suddenly, she turned and sentenced. She never wanted to see that man again in her life. As soon as she spoke those words, the Emperor instantly fixed his gaze on Pond. He ordered him never to appear again, or his life would be in grave danger. Duke Pond promised he would never return, and they dragged him away. Although Lyanna received insincere apologies, she still felt an immense emptiness. She thanked Cayman, because without his help, she wouldn't have even gotten an apology. The young woman also thanked her faithful sword, Louis. With a smile, she noticed they had become very close by coming to help her together. Cayman also thanked the sword for lending him his power. Suddenly, Lyanna realized that Louis had grown in size today. Strolling through the field, they started discussing the losses suffered. Cayman became distressed upon learning that all of Lyanna's delicious watermelon field had been destroyed. The girl scratched her head and said there are years of bad and good harvests. She tied her hair in a tight ponytail and added that in these times one must not give up, but start again. At that moment, Cayman noticed that she didn't resemble the elegant lady his father mentioned. However, the girl was happy to have become precisely that. Cayman watched the optimistic girl with a smile. He kissed her hand and expressed respect for living honestly, despite the difficulties. The Emperor reminded her that he wanted to tell her something after they finished. The girl supposed he was talking about his little sisters, but that wasn't the case. The moment arrived when Cayman finally decided to confess who he really was. He almost uttered the magic words, but Susan interrupted him with shouts. The girl immediately started cleaning the soot off Lyanna. Finally realizing how she looked this whole time, Lyanna became embarrassed and proposed talking later. The girl ran away so fast that Cayman didn't have time to say anything. The rest of the time, he was extremely displeased with how Susan ruined the moment. His displeasure was interrupted by Grandma Aurelian and a cup of tea. His attention was drawn to a jar with an ingredient she added. It turned out that Lyanna had been preparing it all day for all the residents, as it is good for the respiratory system. Aurelian suddenly asked him what he was going to do with the Duke. He replied that he had already notified that the Duke would go to the Empire to attend his wedding, implying that he would never return to the kingdom. This way, Aurelian would have the opportunity to do with him whatever she saw fit. It turned out that Cayman locked him up in Poston, but everyone else will believe he is at the wedding in the Empire. If everything turned out differently, the kingdom would oppose the Emperor's revenge. But this way nobody will know. She praised her grandson, after which he proposed a new idea. The grandmother also asked if the ego sword had really recognized him. Despite Cayman's objection, she felt that the sword might have accepted him as its master. She smiled upon seeing that everything had turned out just as she had planned. What was her surprise when he said he wasn't finished yet? She instantly knew he hadn't revealed his identity yet. Grandma Aurelian began to scold him for his softness. Meanwhile, Kang Siena was already on her way to Posting. She thoughtfully contemplated Lord Aurelian's palace. As she approached the final point, a sinister joy invaded her. The next morning, Lyanna, Cayman, and Aurelian inspected the agave. Lyanna examined it carefully, because after the fire it began to ooze and sprout a stem. During this time, she had become a true expert in agaves. She supposed this little one wanted to show its flower to Aurelian one last time. Lyanna added the rumor that upon seeing the precious flower, one should make a wish. She looked at Aurelian and was glad that she wasn't distressed. The lady was extremely happy that the flower could give such a gift. Her reaction showed Lyanna that, as long as one is alive, one can heal their wounds and move on. With a smile, she asked the young woman to check the flower every day. Lyanna suddenly decided that, when the agave flower bloomed, she would wish to be happy with Cayman. The man seemed to grasp her thoughts and responded with a tender smile. His attention embarrassed the young woman, but he told her she was very cute. He was impressed by the girl with the straw hat and gardening gloves. He suddenly moved closer to her and told her he really liked this Lyanna. Aurelian unexpectedly said they should restrain themselves a little in front of the grandmother. Before leaving, she added that they should hurry up and get married and then have a baby. Although it was a joke, Lyanna enjoyed Cayman's confusion. Their moment was interrupted by the butler, announcing a guest. Liana couldn't believe what she was seeing upon meeting Kang Sena. She noticed that the young woman hadn't improved at all since becoming a princess. It turned out she came specifically to meet Liana. She supposed Sena might come to ask her to reject David's proposal. Still, she didn't expect her to show up without protection. Cayman started to worry, thinking this would ruin her mood. Liana decided the best thing was to discuss all this in person immediately. She suddenly realized she needed to change before the meeting. Cayman smiled sweetly upon hearing her say she would sort everything out and come back. Despite everything, he respected her strength, but still didn't want her to suffer. He knew about Kansen and the prophecy where she was the saint. Everyone saw her as a deity who would bring prosperity to the kingdom. The king's men believed that the kingdom awaited an upswing, and the empire, after losing the sword, only decline. Rage flooded him as he remembered her arrogance. Marrying the saint helped control the people, indicating superstitious propaganda. It hurt him to think of Liana suffering before hundreds of gazes. He changed into a servant's tailcoat, determined to help Liana. Cayman couldn't allow that woman to mock her again. In the end, he decided to disguise himself to find out her true objective. As soon as Zane entered, he immediately expressed his discontent. Cayman was sure she wouldn't recognize his face. As if reading his mind, the girl stared intently into his eyes. She immediately shamelessly grabbed his arm and asked what he was doing there. Cayman abruptly pulled his hand away and told her she was mistaken. But those familiar golden hair and blue eyes struck the girl. He whispered to her to stop pretending and revealed that he was the emperor. The man couldn't believe she had recognized him without even having seen him before. He suggested they go to the room, hinting that they would continue talking. Zaina, frankly, said she wanted to talk to him and then asked what he was doing there. She was sure he would appear in the second part of the original. But everything changed. The girl thought aloud if it was really Kemen. The man instantly supposed that, although she knew him, she didn't know his face. To his surprise, she cornered him against the wall and asked why he had remained silent. She supposed he had fallen in love, as he must like shameless women. Indirect ones. Suddenly, he felt a pang of anger and admitted that she was right. However, he didn't like girls like her, but like Liana. Her arrogant gaze disgusted him, that of a man sure of being loved. He didn't understand how someone could cause such discomfort without malice. Cayman let go of her hand and threw her out. Her presence was unbearable to him. The girl couldn't believe he had rejected her like that. Her face darkened with fury, threats about to explode. But Liana stopped him, shocked to see both of them together. Before the meeting, she decided to dress as she always did. She didn't know what might happen, so she took Louis with her. Liana suddenly scolded the sword for not wanting to accompany her. She suddenly asked how he felt. He was still crying nonstop. She tried to cheer him up, telling him she wanted to be his support, just as he was for her. The sword cried, feeling her sincere support. He asked for forgiveness for having betrayed his master. However, Liana didn't get angry and ordered him to transform into a dagger. Then, she absolutely did not expect to find Kang Sena with Cayman. The man ran towards her immediately and said it was a misunderstanding. Sena judged her, saying she should have arrived later and not interrupted their talk. The girl replied that she hadn't changed at all and kept blaming everyone. Kang Sena was no longer considered a saint, nor did she possess the power of a god. She thought Liana was trying to annoy and provoke her. The princess demanded apologies for Liana's audacity in harassing her husband. The girl instantly replied that she herself had cornered her fiancé. Kang Sena believed Liana was trying to seduce her husband because David forced the duke to bring her. Cayman explained that he left as soon as he learned of her engagement. Apparently, only his words made her understand that Liana had no interest in David. The princess suddenly covered her face hysterically and burst into laughter. She asked with great distrust if they were really engaged. The young woman declared that she didn't fully believe it, but would accept that answer. Suddenly, she shamelessly added that they should hurry up and give her a room. The princess collapsed on the sofa and said she didn't want to return to the capital immediately. It caused such irritation that it was extremely hard for Liana to restrain herself. It also grated on her nerves that this woman kept flirting with Cayman. She replied with marked irritation that she couldn't give her a room without being the owner. Sena demanded to ask the owner, but Cayman told her to leave. She condemned him for such treatment and ordered the lord to be called. However, the very next second, they ordered her to be thrown off the estate. Liana smiled at the grandmother, happy about how quickly she had intervened. Kansana couldn't believe she was treated this way and demanded justice. Aurelian said mercilessly that one should not tolerate the antics of that hen. Liena reacted instantly, wanting to know about that incident on the wall. Kamen said he was pretending to be a servant to find out this woman's motives. At one point, she pronounced his name and began to interrogate him. He also didn't understand how she could know who he was, which triggered all this. Liena froze upon realizing that she had grabbed him and was talking about the original. And the sequel. She knew the plot of the novel she was trapped in perfectly well. There, Liena mocked Sena, who had become a thorn in her side. It seemed strange to her that the work ended with a wedding and a happy ending. Suddenly, she supposed there must be a second part. With Kamen as the protagonist, she returned to the conclusion that it was impossible to ignore a treat like him. Now she understood Kansena's reaction, thinking the hero must be hers. She immediately became worried, fearing that Kamen might have felt something special. The idea that he might like Kansena terrified her. Liena was hurt thinking that all those moments would vanish over a couple of lines. She began to fear that Kamen might reject her. He seemed to notice her unease and promised he wouldn't make that mistake again. He caressed her and begged her not to wear such a sad face. The girl pleaded with him not to be interested in her, even if he felt something. Kamen was pleased that she was jealous, but Liena didn't feel the same. She suddenly apologized and promised she wouldn't allow that to happen again. Liena didn't understand why he suddenly seemed so cold, despite smiling. Upon reaching his office, Kamen saw Sena still standing at the entrance. He recalled that situation in the living room again. The words Lena said kept echoing in his head. The strange reaction of both girls worried him. They shared the idea that he would show interest in Kangzane. He was also worried that Sena was talking about the original, so he decided to investigate. In the novel, Sena was supposed to be in a love triangle after finding the egoism sword. Even months later, the girl still had doubts about Kamen's appearance. Suddenly, she supposed everything would be fine if she found the egoism sword. However, she still didn't understand how she could obtain it. These thoughts literally made the girl's head explode. She tossed irritably in bed, not understanding how to find what she had never seen. Sena blamed the writer because Kamen still hadn't appeared, and her relationship with David was worsening. The maids tried to calm her, justifying everything with David's tight schedule. They also tried to make her understand that begging for a necklace was not suitable for a lady of her status. Zaina suddenly stood up abruptly and told them not to worry. She declared proudly that he behaved this way due to a lack of rivals. The young woman was sure everything would resolve itself. She calmly enjoyed the privileges of the protagonist and trusted in her success. Even then, sitting in the carriage, she was glad to have come for the portrait and found Kamen. She was convinced that he would fall madly in love with her. She imagined how he would surrender to the protagonist's love. A maid interrupted her, telling her it was better to rest there due to the darkness. The crown princess couldn't allow herself to sleep in a carriage. Never. To make matters worse, they denied her food and even soft bread. The maid explained that the city was very cautious about outsiders after the fire. It seems the woman was already fed up with Sena's eternal whims. From the beginning, she demanded to break ties with Lady Pond. At first, she hesitated, but soon believed in the lady's gift and followed her. Now she tried to get her to go to the capital, suggesting that Lady Pond might go to see David. However, she only replied that soon he would crawl to her feet after the appearance of a rival. The maid doubted Sena's sanity more and more. The young woman lived in daydreams, waiting for scenes from the novel. She shouted so loudly in the gazebo that Anchor discovered them. Kang Sena immediately examined the stern man with admiration. She couldn't believe what she saw. It was Lord Anchor himself. He quickly pierced her with his gaze, causing her fear. Sena immediately played the saint, saying she saw him in a dream. The man directly asked her if she knew where she was going. The young woman confidently said she was going to the capital for the egoism sword. Although she was looking for the sword, something didn't add up to her at all. Not long before, the emperor had asked him to personally investigate this woman's case. He asked him to, if necessary, pretend she was right to find out something new about her. Anchor instantly feigned surprise and decided to flatter her ego a little. He was surprised when she unintentionally said she had been reading for a long time. He asked her a question, after which she said he should stay in the kingdom for about 3 months. Angkor was astonished when she mentioned Douglas Marshall, the emperor's uncle. This led him to think that she might really be seeing the future. Kang Sena proudly stated that she could solve the problem by mastering the ego sword. Anchor supposed her knowledge was quite superficial, so he could have his own spy in the empire. From her words, He thought that in the kingdom, they might have discovered that Liena is a sword master. He decided to test the waters and let slip that the emperor had already found clues to the sword. The girl couldn't believe what she was hearing. When he added that she should return to the empire soon, Zaina jumped up instantly, saying the story wasn't resolved yet. She understood the terror of her situation. She hadn't conquered David's heart and Cayman's yet. After thinking for a moment, she announced her request. The next morning, Cayman was surprised that his ear had been itching nonstop since yesterday. Liena suggested it was due to the soot, but he dismissed that explanation. The girl suddenly snuggled up against him with a smile and said she would clean his ears. Aurelian mocked them and told them they could kiss now, as they were adults. She decided to imply that they shouldn't expect that from an idiot incapable of speaking. She scolded him for talking about the wedding like a parrot, without a ring or a flower. She completely crushed him in the argument and left for the greenhouse. Liena decided to follow her, and Cayman felt the same urge. As soon as he tried to join, they stopped him dead. Waiting for Liena to leave, Aurelian ordered him to reflect on revealing his identity. Suddenly, he realized all those proposals were just words. If he had known Susan was coming, he would have ordered her to bring the jewels. He was still thinking he should prepare the proposal first and then rebel. But then Anchor arrived, interrupting him. Cayman asked if that woman had left for the capital, but Anchor hesitated to answer. The emperor froze upon learning that she requested to be taken to the empire. He didn't understand what exactly she intended by that. Anchor recalled their dialogue and still couldn't draw a clear conclusion. She asked for it so vehemently that he couldn't hide his astonishment. It seems even her maid was shocked by her wishes. Zaina bluntly stated that she must charm Cayman right in the empire. Anchor was so stunned by the girl's stupidity and audacity that he became speechless. He informed her that her future-seeing skills were unreliable, as she ignored the sword master. He also mentioned her words about the incorrect course of history. Suddenly, Cayman remembered that she addressed him as the hero of a novel. He supposed she saw a future where she overthrew Liena and seized the sword. However, he instantly realized that perhaps she knew nothing about Liena. He gave the order for Anchor to inform her that her request had been fulfilled. The man understood that this could bring trouble and rumors. Cayman reminded him that she had arrived with a maid. This indicated that they could confirm that Kang was in the empire of her own free will. They decided they would tell the maid all this directly. Even though he followed her to Poston, they could execute her as Zaina's accomplice in treason. They counted on her returning to the palace by any means and informing him. Now they had to decide who would take on that crucial role. With a single look, Anchor knew this was what awaited him. Meanwhile, Aurelian was instructing Liena on the wisdom of family life. Despite everything she said, she could feel the sincerity in Kamna's feelings. She tried to prove that he was incomparable to jewels and bouquets, but the woman thought differently. She was astonished that Aurelian reasoned about so many things based on her experience. Liena supposed that she too would do everything possible for her husband. The woman replied that her mistake was not being firm in the face of her husband's first mistakes. She suddenly added that even defects that seem adorable can change a couple. Despite this, Liena still believed that the wife's role is to correct her husband's flaws. They noticed that the agave was growing very well. As soon as she supposed the agave would touch the ceiling, the lady proposed demolishing it. Liena remembered that this plant was the only thing left after the divorce. She wondered if she was thinking of her husband when she saw Gabe. She didn't understand her grandmother's feelings, but she saw that she still loved him. Liena wondered if she could love someone so deeply and for so long. She suddenly closed her eyes and decided she wanted to convey that feeling to Cayman. After that, she decided to get to work as usual. She was surprised that Louis didn't respond in any way to her war cry. It seemed to her that Louis might be going through puberty. That's why his emotions are so unstable. As soon as he spoke, she directly asked him about his feelings. Liena supported him, telling him she was ready to listen to him. He immediately said that someone else might say they love him. Suddenly, he thought that he might worry about Kangzane, feeling a similar wave to Liena. The young woman asked him not to worry and added that she wouldn't give him to anyone. Louis suddenly remembered the warmth of Cayman's hands and blamed himself for wanting to leave Liena. Despite this, Liena replied that to her, he was the best. Louis said that because of her kindness, his conscience tormented him even more. The girl suddenly changed and said she needed hard work. The sword was startled when she casually mentioned how she would use him. She ordered him to transform into a plow so she could till the field today. Louis couldn't hide his disgust when she cleaned the mud off with him. Liana knew she had to reorganize all this as soon as possible. In this world, they used a different oil, so the impact wasn't that severe. Finally, they managed to improve the situation a little. Susan immediately called it good and fun training. Liana said she still had work and requested help. Meanwhile, the maid was begging Kang Sena to return. She tried to dissuade her from traveling to the Empire, but in vain. The Kingdom-Empire relationship was bad, so her plans could fail. Sena only replied that the Emperor wanted to return to her. Angkor arrived to her early in the morning and conveyed Kamen's decision. He told her to go to the Lord's castle, training ground before noon. The maid could hardly believe those words, since Sena hadn't even seen the Emperor. However, the princess was sure that the story would start unfolding in the Empire. She believed Kamen would fall in love with her after receiving the sword. That said, she left as quickly as she could. The maid didn't understand why she was willing to give up wealth and power for the Empire. She even sent a message to David, saying she would go to the sanctuary for a while. David threw the note away, feeling his head ache just from her handwriting. He was also worried about the lack of news from Duke Ponda. He thought Liana might have suffered too, and that he would have to comfort her. David suddenly thought that, compared to Sena, her offense was even sweet. When he first saw her, she seemed more like a plant than anything else. He didn't understand why they had sent him precisely the redhead. Despite his displeasure, he needed Duke Pont's influence. That day, Liana thanked him for choosing precisely her. She was surprised by the sincerity of someone she wasn't even happy to see. Her cheeks flushed a soft color, and her face smiled like a flower. Thinking of her, he hoped in his mind that she would arrive soon. David supposed that this woman with a sincere heart would never abandon him. However, a worried assistant ran to him immediately. A notification arrived from the Empire regarding territorial changes with the Emperor's seal. It was rumored that Lady Aurelian, before dying, decided to return Poston to the Empire. Originally, Poston belonged to the Empire, but after the divorce, Aurelian decided to stay in the kingdom. Therefore, no one will be able to prevent the return to the Empire. This also indicated that Aurelian had not broken all ties with the Empire. In addition to this, a notification regarding an engagement also arrived. This was incomprehensible to David, since the Emperor didn't need permission to marry. Suddenly, he supposed that the future Empress might be from his kingdom. At first, David thought that person had the same name as his future wife. The assistant stunned him with the news that Lena Pond is engaged to the Emperor. David thought he was mistaken, since Duke Pont had gone to get her back. He knew that cunning man would never give up being the father of the queen. The Duke would not let such an opportunity slip away, knowing the power it entails. The assistant added that he also couldn't believe it until he saw the letter. It detailed all of Duke Pont's misdeeds and a request to the Empire to intervene. Additionally, Pont betrayed the prince, giving permission for Liana's marriage to the Emperor. David clenched the letter in fury, sensing his imminent defeat. He ordered soldiers to be sent to Poston, but it was an impossible mission. The assistant suggested that, thanks to the teleportation connection with the Empire, Liana might have already fled the country. David became even more enraged. He couldn't allow this to happen. Meanwhile, the Emperor reveled in the idyllic rural life. Watching the people labor, his heart filled with peace. He knew the country was sustained by the efforts of many, but seeing that work brought him different feelings. Until now, he hadn't realized the true value of their work. A little girl ran up to him and asked if he was looking for her little sister, Liana. He immediately replied that he was looking for Susan, and then he knew she was at Liana's house. He was surprised that Susan had been plowing the field since the morning. Kamen thanked her for her help and pointed to her mother, who was calling her. The girl ran off, waving goodbye and smiling warmly. Kamen replied with a smile, wishing to keep that moment in his heart. Being the emperor, he decided never to forget the value of the smallest things. Understanding this simple truth, he headed towards Liana. She instantly froze upon hearing that familiar voice. The young woman immediately asked him to wait and not come in. After a few minutes, she finally appeared at the door and told him he could enter. He, surprised, immediately asked her what she was doing. His astonishment was immense when she offered him a bouquet and proposed marriage. She added that she would take care of him and proposed they live happily ever after, full of love. Kamen was so stunned by her declaration that he was left speechless. She also said she had prepared their house for them to live together. Susan wanted to joke, but was surprised when he accepted the bouquet. He smiled sweetly and said he would continue counting on her. Cayman immediately said he loved imagining their future together. Liana instantly brought a drafted marriage contract. Cayman was surprised that Liana proposed marriage to him and drafted a contract. He immediately thought about quickly resolving the border issues for the sweet and diligent Liana. It seems even the sword didn't understand when this fool would reveal his identity. Cayman asked Susan to send a message to the priest. The girl couldn't believe he wanted to get married right there in Poston. The emperor knew they didn't do that in Poston, but he longed to create memories. At that moment, Susan understood that he was truly blind with love. They didn't hold weddings in Poston, they only decorated the house for the newlyweds. After that, they proposed marriage and signed the prenuptial agreement. Cayman said he wanted to start living with her right away, but it would take time to move everything. Liana was struck that he was even willing to hold a wedding ceremony with a priest. The next day, she was surprised to see a flag flying above it. She tried to find out what was going on, but the knight almost called her Your Highness. Liana couldn't believe Poston had become imperial territory so quickly. She immediately thought about the need for a new business plan. Lewis criticized her for only thinking about the farm. Everyone was waiting for her in the greenhouse, where the agave had finally bloomed. Everyone was astonished at how beautiful it looked. She immediately ordered everyone to join hands and make a wish. Liana silently wished that she and Cayman would be happy every day. She looked at him and wished that many years later, they would see this beautiful flower together again. Feeling embarrassed, she decided to ask Cayman what his wish was. To her surprise, he repeated the same wish she had made. She asked Aurelian to make a wish, but she replied that she didn't need one. The woman looked at the beautiful couple and said that all her wishes had already come true. Aurelian smiled when Liana looked at her with surprise. Susan approached them asking if there was any shovel work today. Liana smiled and replied that today they would go check on the bees in the forest. She added that they were even producing their own honey. They finally understood why Liana made so many sweets despite the cost of sugar. The girl immediately prepared for work and was ready to leave. Cayman didn't want to let her go and decided to accompany her. Liana explained that she chose a place far from Poston's lands so she wouldn't have to ask for permission. She added that next season, she wanted to move the hives closer to the fields. Liana was glad he didn't notice her law infraction. On the way to the forest, Liana asked Louis about his wish. She tried to get the truth out of him, but he didn't want to explain himself. Finally, he shamefully said he wished that he and his master would be happy together for a long time. A long time, Liana tried to hide her confusion and decided she would also make that wish. Thinking about it, she accidentally didn't see a stone under her feet. Liana was frightened when she felt the ground disappear beneath her. She didn't fall, as Cayman immediately caught her. The emperor put her on the ground and suggested they hold hands. The girl was surprised when he said he was willing to carry her in his arms. Louis tried to sneak away and then said he wanted to give them a chance to be alone. Cayman didn't hear his words, but assumed he wanted time alone with Liana. As soon as the girl remembered his words, Cayman offered to carry him, causing Louis delirium. Louis blamed himself for thinking about hugging Cayman and fled in shame, feeling like a scoundrel. He was crying so hard that even Liana was unable to understand what he was saying. Cayman decided to calm him down with a conversation. He said he wanted to carry him instead of Liana, since he had always protected his master. His words sparked a new temptation in the sword, so he fled even farther. Condemning himself, Liana supposed he was going through a teenage crisis. Louis didn't understand why such an incredible man had become emperor just now. When Cayman took him in his hands, he remembered again what it meant to live and be a sword. That's why Louis began to wonder if Cayman could be his master. He ordered himself to stop getting distracted by those ideas, as he could not betray Liana. Cayman noticed Liana's unease and proposed talking to Louis alone. The girl immediately approached the sword and asked how he felt. The sword hid his gaze and confessed that he felt disgusted with himself. Liana encouraged him, assuring him that he would manage to overcome this situation. The sword instantly shouted, asserting that he was the best sword. He explained the hard work involved in creating a perfect sword. Liana supposed that his creation had required many hammer strikes. Louis lamented that, despite everything, they hung him on a wall without appreciating his worth. Sadness flooded Liana. They simply ignored her. He added that for that very reason, he hid his true identity and hid around the world. His words suddenly made her reflect on whether she truly understood his value. Louis meant that he had finally found someone who valued him. But he fell. He hid among the bushes, unable to express his feelings. Cayman noticed that she was alone. Afterwards, she told him about their conversation. He noticed that Louis started acting strangely, since he went with him to protect her from the Duke. Lyanna suddenly supposed that something might have changed in his feelings. They froze upon hearing a deafening scream. Cayman immediately stood up and said it could be a monster. They heard a strange voice coming from the sky. It turned out the monster was trying to steal Louis, squeezing him in its jaws. Lyanna pointed at the huge bird and said it had kidnapped Louis. The girl immediately ran towards the monster, wanting to protect her beloved sword. After a while, they finally found the thieving bird. It had been circling in the sky for so long that Louis felt awful. Cayman decided to be the bait and ordered them to run when the bird dropped the sword. She tried to stop him, but he was already ready to release Louis. He launched forward at full speed, attracting the bird's attention. It seems he succeeded, and it finally opened its mouth. The man saw his chance and wanted to take Louis. She screamed furiously and threw the dizzy and exhausted Louis. Cayman decided to risk his life. He snatched Louis and threw him towards Lyanna. The girl instantly ran towards the sword, but the bird aimed at Cayman. She held Louis worriedly and asked how he felt. In the next instant, she saw a huge claw aiming at Louis. She screamed loudly when she saw the bird smash Cayman against the ground. Lyanna was so shocked that she couldn't move an inch. She begged Louis to help her save Cayman by giving him his power. Louis refused, saying it was a very dangerous situation that could put her at risk. The girl immediately said they couldn't let Cayman die. Suddenly, an idea crossed her mind, and then she apologized to Louis. She threw the sword hard towards Cayman so that Louis could transfer his power to him. Cayman was sitting on the ground, not understanding how they would get out of there. He was surprised to see the egoism sword next to him. Louis felt dizzy again after being abandoned once more. Lyanna shouted loudly for Louis to reunite with Cayman. She added that Cayman could unlock his potential. The Emperor smiled and asked Louis for help once more. The sword screamed, surprised once again at how amazing his mistress was. Finally, Cayman could hear Louis's voice and took him in his hands. He masterfully guided his hand, determined to deliver the final blow. Louis synchronized so much with him that they looked like a perfect mechanism. In an instant, he struck down the monster with a single, devastating blow. His movements were so precise that even he was surprised by the sword's power. Once the bird fell to the ground, he could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Lyanna exclaimed, completely astonished that they defeated the monster in one blow. She smiled, stating that they were like a single entity. The girl said that Louis had finally found someone who valued him as a sword. She asked him to sincerely tell her what he desired, but he didn't dare. In an instant, Louis confessed that he longed to be Cayman's sword. Lyanna scolded him for not telling her sooner and making her suffer like that. Louis justified himself by saying he never wanted to serve two masters at once. She leaned down and admitted that she didn't compare to the swordsman Cayman. Lyanna added that such an exceptional sword should serve a worthy owner. The young woman expressed her willingness to yield to whoever could unlock his potential. Louis only replied that she was the best he had ever known, and he would protect her until the end. Cayman asked if he could consider that he had recognized him as master, but Louis denied it. Suddenly, he asked if he would still need Lena after obtaining the sword. Louis questioned him on what was more important to him, his objective or Lena. Lena judged him for his deceit, but for Louis, it was crucial to know. The girl darkened, realizing that he was right. She had also asked herself the same question, but avoided it after getting close to Cayman. She understood that this could hurt her more than David's betrayal. Lena burst into tears, refusing to hear something like that from Cayman. Suddenly, she asked why one single thing had to be chosen. Louis grew sad instantly, telling her that he had misunderstood. She moved her hands away from her face when Cayman hugged her, preparing to answer. The Emperor said he would always respect Lena, and that she was his main priority. At first, he did long for the sword, but now he understood that his path had always led him to Lena. The man confidently asserted that his soul could not live without her. He wiped the girl's tears and swore he would do anything for her. It seems Louis was satisfied with that answer to his question. He stood up and decided to introduce himself to Cayman, just as he had with Lyanna at the beginning. Louis sentenced that the contract was sealed and asked him to take him. He took another form and promised to do everything to make him proud to have him as master. Louis warned that he would not forgive him if he betrayed Lyanna. Lyanna smiled and commented that she was starting to feel redundant. They both replied at once that she came first and went to look for honey. The girl, smiling, pointed out the hives where the bees lived. She asked them to stay away because she didn't have a protective suit. She was happy that there was much more honey this year than last year. She was pleased by how attentively Cayman listened to her. She realized she forgot the container and looked at Louis, but he can't stand stickiness. Leanna said she would now have to eat it right there. Cayman moved away, saying he would inspect the area. As soon as he left, Leanna let out a sinister laugh instantly. She was happy about the fact that she was finally alone with Louis. She squeezed him spitefully and called him an annoying mother-in-law in sword form. Leanna said that because of his questions, she sobbed and told Cayman embarrassing things. She suddenly remembered when he said his soul wouldn't live without her. The girl instantly rejoiced out loud that he said that, surprising Louis. She let him go and thanked him for letting her hear Cayman's true feelings. As soon as she asked if he would regret it, she immediately condemned him. She screamed that she loved Cayman and would keep her love for him. Louis, with difficulty, agreed with her, but begged her not to blame him later. As soon as they resolved it, Cayman returned and reported the absence of monsters. He didn't have a knife, so the honey splashed directly onto his hand. Cayman suddenly said that the precious honey was not worth spilling and licked it off his hand. Leanna tried to stop him, but he kept kissing her fingers. It seems he was just as embarrassed as Leanna by what he was doing. At that moment, the girl once again remembered how seductive he could be. She froze in embarrassment, feeling her face getting closer to his. They were about to kiss, but Louis interrupted them, announcing the arrival of sunset. The newlyweds abruptly separated, trying to hide their confusion. Leanna remembered that they couldn't return empty-handed, as the grandmother was waiting for them. She was surprised when Cayman said they were going to his house. Cayman confessed that he had time to fix up the house a little while she was living in the castle. He illuminated everyone with his light, expressing sincere emotions. Leanna was about to start a life together after the wedding, but couldn't resist the temptation. Returning home, she couldn't believe that this man had almost stopped her heart several times in one day. As soon as she saw their house, she thought she was living a dream. The current house was so different from the previous one that she couldn't believe what she saw. Cayman cheerfully noted that the house had changed a bit. The girl was surprised to see that even the entire interior of the house had been modified. He renovated everything, including the living room, kitchen, and bathroom. Suddenly, Leanna realized that not only had he moved in, but he had also hired builders. Cayman also confessed that he had chosen a larger bed for them. Her face turned red when he said it had to be bigger for the two of them. She told him to forget the bed and just wash up, but that made her even more embarrassed. Cayman told her to bathe first, while he went to get firewood. As night fell, he said he would leave as soon as she fell asleep. He also prepared a corner for Louis, so he could protect her. Leanna turned, thinking tonight would be their first night together. Her heart was beating so fast, she couldn't bear those emotions. She wanted to tell him to go to sleep too, but didn't dare. Louis thought she had fallen asleep and decided to ask Cayman something. He barely managed to contain his astonishment when he heard him ask what he liked about her. He asked him to honestly confess when he had fallen in love with Leanna. Louis said it was unbearable for him to see that he still couldn't confess it to her. Cayman grew sad, saying he wasn't sure how strong Leanna's feelings were. The girl rejoiced, thinking he wanted to know if she loved him. Louis suddenly called him a crybaby and added that this wasn't what he expected to hear. Cayman asked him if he was sure Leanna loved him for who he was, not for his ability to transform into tools. Louis suddenly said he never doubted her feelings. His requests embarrassed him, but still, he was willing to fulfill them. Cayman agreed with him, saying he really was a weakling. He asked Louis to believe that he truly loved Leanna. The girl watched him with admiration, feeling her heart about to burst. Louis said he didn't have to tell him that, but the person behind him. Their eyes met, just as Cayman realized he had heard everything. Leanna felt like giving him the same reassurance he had once given her. She longed to give him all those feelings that beat strongly in her chest. The young woman stood up and declared that she loved him more than anything in this world. Suddenly, Cayman asked what she would say if he were a completely different person. Immediately, she started to worry, wondering if he had perhaps turned into a bandit. After receiving a negative answer, she affirmed that, no matter what, he would still be Cayman. It seems that, finally, he heard what he had needed to hear for so long. He held her tightly and confessed that he loved her so much that he was afraid to tell her the truth. Leanna smiled and told him to do nothing and just love her. She clung to him and asked him never to change. Cayman pulled away and caressed her face, swearing it would be so, promising her he would never hurt her. He kissed her passionately. Those emotions overwhelmed Lena, unable to resist. Finally, they gently separated, enjoying the moment. Cayman's eyes reflected an infinite love for the girl. Louis tactfully reminded them that, despite the happiness, they needed to restrain themselves. He added that he also needed to prepare, as he didn't want his mistress to marry. Cayman hugged her from behind, regretting having placed Louis so close. He whispered that the next day, he would move him to the main hall. After that, they wished each other a peaceful good night. The next morning, Cayman's uncle arrived at the residence. The man was outraged because he didn't even bother to receive him. Douglas Marshall protested, saying he was his uncle, not a stranger. It hurt him to have had to learn about the wedding from the newspapers. Rhys realized that he had come to cause a scandal over the wedding. He was now second in line to the throne, and the appearance of an heir was a threat. Rhys calmed him down, telling him he had no right to barge in unannounced and demand anything. Douglas protested, saying it was wrong to marry someone from another kingdom. Rhys replied that he had no right to doubt the choice of the former empress, and he felt a war for power approaching.